Hello, everyone. It's George from Ireland. So, welcome back to my channel once more. And in this, I'm talking about how Russia manages to attain forbidden components for military applications because the war's been going on for over 2 years. It's about 2 years since the first sanctions prohibiting the sale of dual-use items to the Russian Federation or Belarus. Of course, Belarus is not a co-belligerent in this war, but it's a member of the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization. It's so close to Russia. In 1999, they signed the treaty agreeing to eventually reunite with Russia. That hasn't happened. But the assumption is that any militarily applicable component sold to Belarus would simply be passed on to Russia. The Russian military base is already in Belarus. So microprocessors, transponders, and so on, they're finding their way there. Unexploded Russian ordnances open up missiles, rockets, drones, and so forth. And the Ukrainians are saying, look at this, it'd be American, German, manufactured, whatever. And some of it they can tell from the serial number it was produced after the war began. So yeah, will the European Union transfer frozen financial assets to Ukraine? I think there will eventually some. There's been so much talk about it, but the European Union is so behindhand. They sometimes don't make the right decision, but they take so long to do it and they water it down. Often it's the pace of the slowest. Often they need consensus, and Hungary will threaten to veto things. They got an exemption on the purchase of Russian oil. So did the Bulgarians for 2 years. That's just ended. Well, actually, the Bulgarians could have carried on till the end of 2024, but the Bulgarian parliament voted to bring that to a close early. Now, that will have a minimal impact on the Russian economy because Bulgaria is a country of only about 6 million people now, population falling like a stone since the end of the communist era. And so it's just not a very big export market. It's a bit of a psychological blow to the Ruskies because the Bulgarians are a Slavonic country, Slavic if you prefer. And of course, the Russian army helped to push out the Ottomans and Bulgaria become independent. In the 1880s, the result of Russia. It was a communist country, the only Eastern Bloc country where a cession to the Soviet Union was considered. And obviously, it's an Orthodox Christian country. But, Ukraine's a Slavonic country. Ukraine's an Orthodox Christian country. They can have fellow feeling for the Ukrainians as well. So, and although, tens of thousands of Russians go on holiday there every year to the Black Sea coast, that doesn't prove that Bulgaria is going to support Russia's war of illegal aggression. And there have been extensive Russian espionage operations happening there. Of course, there's a significant minority of opinion in Bulgaria, which leans towards Moscow. Yes, I did see that Navalny memorial, that impromptu one, the flowers outside. Well, actually, the Radcliffe camera. I regret not filming it at the time, actually. Anyhow, so Russia's managing to successfully smuggle these things in. I've obviously talked about purchasing via third countries, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Kazakhstan, China, the United Arab Emirates, and so forth. But the other way around, there are Russian citizens in Sweden are standing trial for allegedly purchasing these components which are forbidden for sale to Russia and sending them on, and so on. And likewise, in the United States, they've just busted a ring of people doing it. Well, they're actually Russians based in Hong Kong. Maxim Marchenko, fascinatingly enough, he's got a Ukrainian surname, but all that tells you is that what he is patrilineal. So patrilineally. So on his spear side, well, that doesn't tell you because that could just be his father's 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 father. That would be the tiniest fraction that he's Ukrainian. And of course, he might even be ethnically Ukrainian and nevertheless believe that Ukraine ought to be part of Russia, or in fact is part of Russia. And whether he's doing it for ideological reasons or not, I don't know. He's a Russian citizen, and he's pleaded guilty in the United States to organizing the purchase of a $1.6 million worth of prohibited items from just shortly after the start of the war to the summer of 2023, and selling them on to entities in Russia that were part of the military manufacturing complex. And they were used for night vision goggles, thermal optics, rifle scopes, and so forth. So Maxim Marchenko, he was resident of Hong Kong when he was doing this, and surprisingly, the Russians managed to have him extradited. I'm surprised that the Chinese did that, but the Chinese are playing ball because they're a bit worried about secondary sanctions. He's also pleaded guilty to money laundering. So he faces a total of 30 years in prison, but because he has pleaded guilty, they're going to go relatively easy on him. He'll probably get half that. So these electronics are what the Russians really need because, of course, their technology is a generation behind. A lot of these things are dependent on things of Western manufacture. Things are made in Canada, France, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy, any Western country with an advanced tech sector, even Japan or South Korea, not that they're Western countries. So these channels are just not being cut off enough. And the West is always hand-wringing and not taking firm actions. And if this were done, the war would come to an end. So unfortunately, Western countries are arming Ukraine enough to prolong the agony, but not to actually end the war. You know, the F-16s still haven't been delivered. Those German Taurus missiles, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is saying he won't do that. Now, there's some on the anti-democratic left and some of the German ultra-nationalists who are both against this, but the German center ground is for it. Social Democrats, the Christian Democratic Union. By the way, the center ground isn't always right. Being extreme is not necessarily a bad thing if you're extremely good or extremely moral, extremely correct or something like that. So we shouldn't just always go for this mush in the middle and just follow the crowd in a cowardly manner. You know, the right thing to do is not halfway between evil and good. Sometimes compromise is dishonorable. Anyway, so yeah, firm actions has not been taken. So these things are sold often for not for resale clause, but simply sold on, and taking strict action to cut countries off from the world financial system with SWIFT and so on. That would put the frighteners. Place like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan would be really wrecked by that, and that would be a shot across the bows of other countries which are expediting the resale of forbidden electronic components to the Russian Federation. So this is an example, and this will happen to you. And yes, there's SIPs or whatever is the Chinese financial system, but it's not as extensive. It's no substitute for access to the world financial system, and Russia can't provide them without much financial or military support. So it's like they've also managed to buy over $16 million worth of airplane parts to keep the Aeroflot fleet somewhat airworthy. It is a minor miracle there's not been a major air disaster so far. So the other thing about sanctions is, of course, by hurting them, you hurt yourself because you can no longer sell these items. There might be counter sanctions. I mean, there's very little from Russia the Western countries need. There's oil, gas, some metals, hardly coal really, potash. But you know, there are other countries that produce these, and the world prices are not as high as you might think. But you know, Western countries' laws of supply and demand. If you reduce the supply available to you, you're going to push up the price when your demand's not falling. And yes, it's transition to green energy, but that's very gradual. And look how Bulgaria was almost entirely dependent on Russian oil, and they've managed to wean themselves off it over 2 years. So that is a major success. Yeah, we've got to just find alternative supply. It's been somewhat successful, and one of the reasons why Western countries are going to soft pedal any criticism of Azerbaijan as regard to taking territory from Armenia, because of course they desperately need Azerbaijani oil and gas, and Azerbaijan's in a very mighty negotiating position, and they know it. So nobody dare put Ilham Aliyev's nose out of joint. One thing about losing Russia as an export market is you don't automatically get it back when sanctions are lifted, and there's really no end in sight. I mean, I see this war going on to 2025 at least, and even if it ends in 2025, that doesn't prove the sanctions are lifted that year, and then China, someone else could get in there and be selling these items. Anyway, well, yes, of course, I do respect Russia, but you know, Putin's idea of respect is meaning that you will turn a blind eye or even have acquiescence in Russia's illegal wars of aggression against other country, international terrorism, obviously state terrorism in Russia, and so forth. Now, the sort of Russians I respect are people like Alexi Navalny, a true Russian hero who laid down his life for his people to try and give them liberty, justice, and to get rid of corruption so that ordinary Russians would have a decent life, so that this bloody war of illegal aggression would come to an end and there would be peace. And that's it. And a man of his talents, he could have been a Putin toady. He could have risen very high. He could have been a cabinet minister. He could have been a multi-millionaire. He could have had a life of sweet delight, but he didn't. He sacrificed all that to do the morally right thing. He was a man of unexampled virtue. So I take my hat off to him. And I'm not blind to his flaws. I realize he has his shortcomings, and he traded in very distasteful, xenophobic rhetoric at times. Right, anyway, thank you so much for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon and donate on PayPal. So georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodle pip. Tschüss, Österreich.